Ivy Valentine subscribes to Mark Yoon. So should you. Enjoy your treat!
I've been saying forever, for as long as I can remember anyway, that people play games for different reasons. And a big reason that a lot of people choose Soul Calibur over other fighting games, or just continue to play Soul Calibur while they're also playing other games, is mainly because of a couple of factors. There's the single player movement and there's also the online movement. A lot of people that are in the single player camp, they'll cite things such as the gameplay mechanics, the 8-way run, but they'll also talk about things like the story or character creation, and all those are equally important. Soul Calibur 7 has a very big shoe to fill when it comes to its narrative, plot, and its story. Season 2 set up a really good story for Soul Calibur 7 to actually run with. And in order for us to actually dive more into the game and appease those people who care about the story, it's going to be super important and super influential to the future of the actual series itself. But why would people actually care about Soul Calibur's story in particular, especially when it's coming up to Soul Calibur 7? Well, there's a few big factors that I think are the root cause of that, and the biggest one for me is that like a lot of people that play fighting games don't in fact play them for the story. It's usually mechanics or even the characters sometimes. But the story is super influential and important in Soul Calibur because it actually tries to weave a narrative. I'm not talking about their history of saying that like this is a mythological version of like actual history and whatnot. I'm talking more about the actual presence that the story creates and how it sets up its characters to actually go on their hero's journey and overcome whatever quest they're actually trying to overcome. In this case being Ishka Oct and Nightmare and the rejuvenation of Algol into this dimension. But the story is so important because other stories and other fighting games know that people don't tend to care too much about the story. Now, sometimes it does happen, like Street Fighter, for example, added a story mode to Street Fighter V after there was a kind of backlash that there was like not really anything to do when the game launched. And I was one of those people because day one there wasn't really anything to do in Street Fighter V except for like go online and play arcade mode. That was it. I don't even know if arcade mode was there day one. I don't remember. It's been so long. But Soul Calibur in particular, like the story means a lot to people that like it and like the story and like the characters, which is why 5 was also so much of a big letdown for most of us. You can't just like say you're introducing new characters and slap a face on a younger character that's almost exactly the same as the character that you're trying to replace them with and then not include the actual original character in the first place. That was a big no-no. I know they were going the route of Street Fighter Third Strike, that's what the director literally said, but it just wasn't the move, and though some people do like it, mainly I have noticed it's because Soul Calibur 5 was their first game or their second after 4, I do tend to sit and agree with the people that the story was kind of booty cheeks. Like it wasn't that good, and we expected a lot more from it, and that's why 6 was such a surprise in terms of narration. Now I know some people had a problem with 6 when it was like text on a wall because the budget was so low, but when you actually take the time to read the story and engage with Libra of Souls mode, play through the entire thing, reach the unlockable bosses, and then actually go to the encyclopedia and read what's going on behind the scenes, because that's where we'll find important information about Zwei and the Wolf Krone, Viola, stuff like that, Rock even. There's a lot of information in the encyclopedia, and a lot of people just tend not to actually read it. I have ways of improving that. I believe that if they just added a voiceover narrative to that, it could be a lot better, but people sitting there reading are just like not going to have it. But 7 is going to have a bigger budget because of the sales on 6, so I believe that there are going to be better presentations of that story. But when we're talking about comparison to other games, like we were mentioning before, there is a lot riding on that because I like a lot of those games, so it's really hard to say stuff like this, and a lot of people don't care about the story, and I can see why. Street Fighter World Tour Mode, for example, it basically boils down to spoilers. Your rival, who you met like one time for like a day, decides to become like evil, and that's it. Like he just like, hey, I'm like being taken over by this like psycho power. And JP, who I thought was going to be this huge bad guy, is just like an accountant who like took over, like, and is like, hey, here's like this stuff. Like, he doesn't even do anything. I don't know. So like the story of even the World Tour Mode, which is supposed to be centered around your created character, was like nothing. It was like, it was non-existent almost. It was just like a fun way to do a beat 'em up with your created character. Tekken usually like leans more into the narrative than that, and I do love Tekken stories, but like it basically comes down to like a Mishima Zaibatsu infighting thing. It's usually like, hey Nina, you're my assassin or whatever, you're going to be slave dog to the Mishimas this time, go and do this. And like all the rest of the cast of characters are like don't even really show up in the story at all. It's pretty much like Jin, Kazuya, Heihachi, and then sometimes whoever they're like romantically involved with, being like Asuka or June, or you know, any number of those characters. They'll play a bit part, but it's mainly just about like the Mishima Zaibatsu at the end of the day. So you pretty much know what you're getting with this. I did love the Tekken Force type mode because it gave us more to do in the game and actually give us like a kind of headcanon-y kind of thing. But when it comes to Tekken, it's like there's not really a lot of narrative there. And if you're thinking you're going to get that in your arcade endings, you usually don't, unless you consider like, you know, Lee Chaolan at the pool, like relaxing, and Heihachi walking by in a thong, like part of the story. Like there's just not much that's really going on there. So you can see why some fighting game people would yearn for like a good meaty story to dive into. And that's not to say that those games are bad. Like I love those games, but just like that's what it comes down to. Now a lot of people will be like, well, Mortal Kombat has like the best story, or they revisionized it. That's like revisionistic history. Like Mortal Kombat didn't really do anything to story modes that hasn't already been done before. A cinematic story has been around since like the PS1 era for certain games, so I don't understand why that is even a mention. But Mortal Kombat is different when it comes to their cinematic story modes, because when you actually try to dive into them, they get rebooted and constantly, so it's like on the 4th reboot, so there's no reason to really care about what's going on because you know it's just going to get rebooted again. And I mean, that may be my opinion personally, but I just don't care about their stories anymore because it's like there's no point in getting attached to the characters or like knowing what's going to happen. And even in the case of like Mortal Kombat 1, they're like, okay, chapter 1 is good, and then the rest of the story is like just goes balls to the wall garbo with like all kinds of stuff that they didn't even set up properly. So I mean, Mortal Kombat 9's story was great. I loved Mortal Kombat 9's story, and when it comes to like the PS2 era, I thought that stuff was amazing with like traveling around like the open world stuff with, well, not open world, but open area stuff with like Taven and Dagon and Shujinko and stuff like that. I thought all of that was great. But when it comes to fighting games, when people actually want like a meaty story that like incorporates most of the characters and they all have something to do and they all have a part of it, Soul Calibur really leads the way with that. True, they'll usually break off into groups of like 3 or something like that, unless it's like Heihachi or Taki, who's like usually doing things on their own. But when they're actually like focused on these group of characters and you're trying to see where they're going and what role they're playing and how they all converge into like the singular ending point of the story, you tend to care, and like you actually like the characters more because they actually are incorporated in the story and in the narrative itself. And a lot of these other fighting games can't tout that. I mean, maybe Guilty Gear, but like who wants to sit there and watch a 5-hour movie that you can't even play? Like, it's the one thing about Guilty Gear that always like turns me off. It's like, I'm not gonna sit here and watch like a Justice League Snyder Cut like edition like length movie where I'm just not being able to play a game. Like when I put a video game in, I want to play it. You know what I mean? Like you're just watching a movie, and yeah, it's beautiful. The cutscenes are great. Like we always know that like ArcSys games are gonna look good, but I want to be involved in that story. I can't really think of any other fighting games that like tend to go story heavy or narrative heavy. Like Virtual Fighter doesn't. Like maybe BlazBlue, I think is really good, but that's more of a niche game. So like games like BlazBlue and Under Night are like, they don't really sell that many copies, so it's kind of hard to like hold them up to the same as like the major fighting games. But Soul Calibur like is super important because the narrative that it pushes actually like makes me like the characters more, and like tends to make other people more involved in the story, especially in Libra. Now people really don't like Libra, like a lot of them, and I've heard people say they don't like it. I've beaten it. Like I love Libra because half of the game's modes are actually trapped behind that mode. I hated it at first, and when I thought that like moving cost money, but then as soon as I figured out that you can like fast travel and stuff, like, and there, you didn't have to pay money anymore, it really opened up to me. And yes, it is a lot of reading, but if you want the hidden bosses, if you want the kind of towers mode, if you want the endless battles where your like portals open up and you're fighting real people as created character from all over the world, when you're doing things like having stage effects where you have like slippery stage or windy stage, when you're doing the ancients and the hidden boss battles, and meeting the characters from like Soul Calibur 3, like Arthur and stuff, and they all have like things to do and things to say, and the minor Soul Calibur characters, all of that is like really important, especially because the character that you create, which I tend to create myself, as you'll see in some of the gameplay, is mind you, a skinnier version, but the characters that I create, it's like I'm in that game, and it surrounds you, like you are the avatar, like you are the one that is like in the center of the story. So you're the one that's interacting with all the characters, or the character that you create, not necessarily you yourself. And that's a huge feeling that I got from like maybe Chronicles of the Sword from Soul Calibur 3. It just makes me want to play the game more, makes me want to play it again. And sometimes I do. Like, there's different paths you can go down. You can do the light path or the dark path. So I'll create, like, myself for, like, the light path. And then I'll create, like, an evil version of myself, which I usually do, like, Demon Mark as for, like, the dark path. And, you just get a whole new feel and fun out of it. Like, true, you want to set aside time. The only thing that I have a problem with is too many games come out, so when I get new games, like, it kind of makes me, like, forget about the old ones for a while. But my channel is primarily based around fighting games, and Soul Calibur at the forefront of that, right? So, I do tend to play Soul Calibur more often than I play other games. So all of this is just a roundabout way of saying that, like, the story does matter, and it's super important for Soul Calibur 7. If they don't nail this story, then, like, it could be one of the nails that actually leads to Soul Calibur's coffin. We see how people turned their back on 5 when the story was cut short by, like, 75%, when the characters that they loved were replaced, when the narrative was, like, awful. There are fans out there, like I said, there are people that love Patroclus and Pyrrha and stuff like that, but most of the people don't like the game, and the sales prove that, because it's like one of the least selling Soul Calibur games of all time. But I just want to like leave that there, and I'm going to turn the question over to you guys in the comment section down below, or we can talk about this on the Discord. I forgot to put up a poll on last week's video. I'm sorry about that, but there will definitely be a poll on this week's video, so please go over to the community tab and actually go and answer that, so you can see your comments on the screen, and we can talk about a lot of stuff here. Thank you to my members. You guys drive the channel, and I can't do this without you. And any and all thoughts are always welcome, guys. And as I always say, I love it. Thank you.
And thank you.